Welcome back to Monster Tamer, a 2D Pokemon-like RPG created Phaser 3. Previously, we worked on adding sound effects and background music to our game. If you missed the previous videos, there'll be links in the video description to source code up to this point, as well as the complete source code for this video. There'll also be links to the previous videos if you'd like to catch up, so let's get started. So now that we wrapped up the audio section in our series, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add some new functionality to our world scene. And so we'll be adding in some new features to our game, and primarily what we're going to focus on is we're going to be doing some work on our map data in Tiled, and we're going to go ahead and extend this so then that way we can add new features like enhancing our random encounters in our game. So currently when we encounter a monster, it's hard-coded to only have one monster appear, and what we're going to do is we're going to start adding some areas to our game. And then when we encounter one of those areas, we're going to have a list of monsters tied to that area, and they'll have a spawn rate for how often they'll spawn for that area. And then this is going to make our game a lot more fun because now when the player wanders around, they're going to encounter random monsters. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to actually enhance our map so we can actually enter buildings from our map. And so we'll be adding in entrances to our various buildings that are in our current level. And then we'll be building out those buildings' interiors inside Tiled as well. And so we'll be reusing a lot of the logic that we put in place for things like our collision areas for our interior. And we'll also be adding in NPCs. Besides that, we'll also work on adding in items that we can pick up from our map and then tying that to our items JSON data so then that way we can actually receive those items in our game. Lastly, what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and enhance some more functionality tied to when we need to respawn in our game. And what we'll do is we'll add an NPC with some custom dialogue, and then we'll add in areas where we can spawn in our game when our player gets knocked out. All right, so what we'll end up doing is we're going to add each of these features one at a time. And so we'll do some work in Tiled. We'll switch over to our code editor and we'll go ahead and add code to handle it. And they'll be going back and forth. So in order to follow along, there are going to be new assets we'll need to go ahead and download and use in Tiled. So in the description of this video, there's going to be a link to this direct download. But there's going to be a new zip folder, this Monster Tamer Tiled Assets Part 2 zip folder. And this is going to have some new assets that we'll be using in Tiled. It's going to have this new top-down interior from Axel Art we'll be using to build the interior of our levels. There'll also be a custom image that'll be used for our mat inside our area. And there's also going to be a new JSON file that's going to have some new custom types that we'll be using for our classes in Tiled. So if you have the project from previously, you can go ahead and download those zip folder here and add those files to your other zip folder. If you don't have it, you can go ahead and download this Monster Tamer Tiled Asset zip folder. This has been updated to have the new files as well as the original files. So if you can go ahead and download one of those two zip folders and then go ahead and open up your Tiled project, we can go get started. And so just for reference, inside that new zip folder, it's going to be 3 files. One is the custom types 2 JSON file, and these other 2 will be our assets we'll be loading into Tiled. All right, if you can go ahead and download one of those folders, go ahead and extract your files and open up your Tiled project. We'll get started. So one thing to know is for these next few videos, we'll be using this My Custom Town level file to do our editing. As I mentioned before, you can build your own level in Tiled. You'll just want to make sure you copy over and use the same patterns that we do for creating our layers. So when we load it into our code, it'll go ahead and work. Otherwise, you'll have to refactor the code a little bit. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and load in our 2 new assets that we need to use. So in the editor, let's go ahead and add in a new tile set. We'll want to make sure embedded map is selected, and let's go into our source. And so for our source, we'll want to grab Axel Art's basic top-down interior file here. And for our tile width and height, it's going to be 64 pixels by 64 pixels. Let's go ahead and hit OK. And so that's going to add it to our tile sets here, so we can go ahead and add these tiles to our map. Next, let's go ahead and do another new asset. Let's browse to that new entrance PNG, and that'll also be 64 by 64. And so once we add both of those, we should have these 2 new tile sets we can use while we're building out our map. The second thing we're going to want to do is if we come up to View, we want to go ahead and go to our Custom Types editor. And so as you can see here, there are a bunch of new types that have been added. And so what you'll want to do is you want to click on Import. And if you go ahead and import that Custom Types 2 JSON file, that's going to go ahead and load in and add the remaining types here that have been added. And so at a high level, some of these types are going to be used for defining our metadata for our areas and for defining like where we can spawn at in our game. Some of them will be tied to our items we'll be adding to our game, and then another one will be tied to our encounter areas, so we can know which monsters will spawn in that area. And then finally, we'll have this entrance that's going to allow us to connect our various points on our map to our interior maps we'll be building out. All right, and so we'll go over these in deeper detail once we get to them in our videos. So we'll go ahead and close out our custom types editor, and we'll go ahead and start editing our level. All right, so for our first feature, adding in our random monsters, this is going to be a pretty easy change to our map data. What we're going to do is we'll want to go ahead and select our encounter layer. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and reference one of our new classes, and that's going to be encounter. And basically what we're going to end up doing is inside our code, when we load our encounter area, we're going to look for this new custom property called area. And with this area, we're going to assign it an ID. And then what we'll do is we're going to have a JSON file that's going to list all of our areas and the possible monsters that can spawn for that area. Then that way, long term, we'll be able to have multiple areas in our game. And for each of those areas, we can list different monsters that can be encountered. And so this would allow us to do different things like our starting area. We could have low-level monsters that would appear in the grass. Versus later on, if we added support for water, we could have like water monsters appear there. Or if it's a later area in the game, maybe we have similar monsters, but there would be higher levels, so it's more challenging to the player. And so by abstracting our data away to our JSON file, we can easily modify our monster list on the fly without having to actually come in and manage those monsters inside Tile directly. All right, so with that small change, what we'll do is let's go ahead and save our level. All right, so after we save, let's go ahead and export out our files. We'll do export as, and what we want to go ahead and do is we want to go ahead and save this as level.json. So I'm going to go ahead and save that to my desktop, and then we'll go ahead and grab that file, and we want to go ahead and place that inside our assets folder for our game. All right, so now we updated our level.json file. The next thing we need to do is we actually need to load that into our game. So let's come back to our IDE, and what we'll want to do is under our assets data folder, we want to replace our level.json with our new level.json. And so once we do that, before we jump into our code, there's some additional assets that we're going to need to load for this section of videos. So in the description of this video, there's going to be a link to this World Scene Part 3 Asset Zip folder as a direct download. And this is going to include some new assets for some new monsters we'll be using here shortly, as well as some assets for representing items in our game. And so you can also find this download in the releases for the game assets on the GitHub repo. So if you can go ahead and download that zip folder, what you should see inside is under the main assets folder, there's going to be images, and then we'll have Axel art. So we're going to have some new art from Axel art. It's going to be the beach image that we're using in Tiled. And so we're also going to use this image for representing items later. And then under the Monster Tamer Monsters subfolder, there's going to be 3 new monsters that will be loading into our game. And so what we'll want to do is with those assets, we're going to place those into that same folder structure into our game. And so if you can go ahead and place those in there now. And so what you should have is under your images folder, under Axel art, we should have that new beach subfolder with our new asset here. And under our Monster Tamer, under monsters, we should have our new monster images here in our game. All right, so now we add these new assets to our game. What we need to do is actually load them in. So let's start off by going to our asset keys, and under our monster asset keys, we want to go ahead and add in 3 new fields to represent our new monsters. So real quick, under our monster subfolder, we have a new monster called Aqua Valor, this monster here. We're gonna have Frost Saber, and then Ignivolt. And so we're just gonna go ahead and make asset keys for each of these. And so we're gonna have Ignivolt, and then we'll have Aqua Valor, and then we're going to have Frost Saber. And what I'm going to do is we're going to copy these and just add in our values. And then what we're going to also do is down under our world asset keys, we're going to add in 1 new key for our beach. And that's going to represent that new tile set that we imported under Axel art and under beach here. And so we're just going to call this beach. We'll just add in our value. And then what we need to do is over on our preload scene, we need to go ahead and load in these assets. So let's jump over to that scene. And then under our monster assets, I'm just going to copy this line of code here, paste it 3 times. Then we need to add in the actual values. Aqua Valor, we'll have Frost Saber, and then we're going to go ahead and have Ignivolt. And then we just need to update our path name. And so we'll have Aqua Valor, we'll have Frost Saber, and then we'll have Ignivolt. And then under our world asset keys, what we'll do is we need to go ahead and add in a sprite sheet. So I'm just going to copy this line of code here. I'm going to go ahead and paste that. And then what we'll do is we need to go ahead and update our reference. So it's going to be world asset keys. It's going to be beach. And then for our path, it's going to be under axle art. So we'll do axle art asset path. And then we're going to have beach. And then for our frame width and height, it's going to be 64 by 64 pixels. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the file name because it's quite long. So we'll come up here. I'm just going to do rename, copy our value, and then I'm just going to go ahead and replace that here. All right, so once we save over in our browser, once our game refreshes, we should see no errors about our new assets being loaded. All right, with that brings this video to an end. In our next video, we'll continue working on adding in our new logic for our level JSON file, and we'll enhance our logic tied to when we encounter monsters. So as a reminder, there's a link in the description of the video to the complete source code for this video, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did enjoy the video, please consider liking the video and hitting the bell icon to be notified when the next video in the series is released. For more great Phaser 3 content, please follow the links on your screen now.